I think you are right. And this is also, I think it has to be by consensus to define the boundaries of the health system. What do we call the health system? I think it has to be customized. The definition has to be customized. Someone gave a definition in the morning about the boundaries of a health system. What was it? Someone in the morning picked.
It is the total sum of the organizations, institutions, and structures whose primary purpose is to improve health.
Okay. So that is a very, very generic definition, not so. Now when you will look at the kind of students we are going to get, I think his point that we are not likely to get students who will do epidemiological studies. Is that correct? Christmas.
Well, how unclear as it is what we want to actually encourage and build capacity because it is a relatively new area. And you can see trying to create boundaries around what we call the HSR and any other research. So we will try to ensure that we encourage our students to do HSR by definition. So we are not likely to have people coming into the
The research design will definitely depend on the question we want to answer. If you get your research question correct, then it will guide you on which research design to employ to answer that question. And as we've seen, there are various designs. There are various designs, and we know the advantages and disadvantages of each. But each time we are designing, the research question is always on our mind. And also the audience, we want to answer this to who? Is it for academic purposes, or do we want to influence policy? And it's always good to understand what your audience will appreciate. At times, he said you health educate. As you do the research already, you may need to health educate your audience to appreciate your design. And I think as we go to facilitate the students, we need a clear definition on what we mean by health system, and also brought in an aspect of service delivery. Hopefully, I don't know whether you are able to embed it in the curriculum now, so that the current understanding of health system research is customized to the needs of this course, to the objectives of this course, which will be translated into the needs of these of the participants. Amasagaran. Is that correct in Ethiopia? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent, for the morning session. And I'm sure each of us have picked a number of things that we can take away with ourselves when we go to teach. And that some of these things seem simple, but we have been doing these things many times. Others have done research, others are doing PhDs and now doing these quantitative courses. So these things seem, but whenever, every time you listen in and learn, there are new things that keep coming up. So I think it's important that we retool ourselves. And so I really must thank the facilitator for your time. And hopefully he has challenged us to try and reflect some of these things not in the curriculum, or they are not within the routine teaching that we do. So thank you very much. We shall break off for lunch. An excerpt of her CV, which I said so she no longer needs much introduction, but just to thank her for taking up the time to come here and be part of this. And is also part of our HSR team.
So good afternoon. I'm hoping we won't spend so much time digesting the food. I know we've just eaten, so I think we'll try to all be here. And so I'll be focusing on this specific module, which is focusing more on how to collect the data and how to manage it, as well as the various techniques for data analysis when dealing with HSR data. And so the first part we'll talk about is the whole issue of data collection. I know this morning we were talking about the various study designs, and we actually started getting also into this issue of data collection, as well as even analysis and interpretation. So it's a build-up on what we were talking about this morning. And so for this specific module, there's 3 components, and we'll go through the various objectives for each of them, and more so for us as trainers, as we go to train others, what are the key things that we need to focus on when dealing with this issue of data collection, management, as well as processing the data and interpreting it. And for data collection, the key thing that we need to engage our students on before they even start thinking about the data collection is there are several questions they need to think about. The number one being, which data do they want to collect? And how do they plan to collect it? Who is going to collect it? And when are they going to collect it? So these are important questions, even for us as researchers, as we engage in research. We have to think about before we actually go and collect the data. The which, the how, the who, and the when. So these are important questions we need to answer before we can think about the data collection. Then the other one, which is important, which we started talking about this morning, is we need to have an understanding of the various types of data that exist. So there is the quant and there is the qual. So we need to be able to distinguish between these two. And the other thing is to think about the whole idea of there's the issue of the source of data as well as the method. There are some methods that will work for some specific questions, and there are others which will not work. And we also need to think about where am I going to get my data. And now, focusing on the source for, and we've also engaged in research before, and there is a secondary source of data and there is also the primary source of data. And when I was speaking about things and thinking about even health and research, there are several data that exist already that we could already start engaging our students in using. And one of the key data sources is the DHS. So there are several, most countries the DHS are done, so that data exists, and there are some questions that you can help us actually answer. Of course, there are some limitations on using this kind of data, but it's important for us to let our students know about the existence of secondary data, because majority of the time, I know even in our university, we are always telling our students you need to go and collect data. You need to learn how to collect data. But at times, there is some rich information which is in the secondary data that they could use. Then, majority of the facilities now have what we call the HMIS, which is another rich source of data that you can use to answer research questions. Then there is global burden of disease data that exists. And I know as part of DHS, there are some countries which also get what we call the SPAR data, which is the service provision and assessment data, which is, I think, very important when thinking about the health systems. Because this is where you get an idea about what the client think about the facility, because they do exit interviews. They also look at supplies of commodities in the facilities. So I think this is very important data that our students can make use of to answer some of their research questions. And so that is for secondary, but there is also the primary data, which you are engaging participants, or you are taking videos. I know he's doing that already to capture some of the moments here. Then you can also have observations. So we need to think about for a specific research question, which data, do I need to get primary data or can I use secondary data? And there are some scenarios whereby you might find you use both the secondary and the primary data. Because at times, I find students at times who are using hospital data because they don't need to run the lab test again because they have already been done, but there are some questions. Since the clinician does not ask all these questions, they ask the question. But the part that the clinician collects the information, they get it from the HMIS. So there are times where we can bring in the two sources of data. Then there is the issue of the method. And for us to be able to decide on which method to use, there are some key things we need to think about. Number one being our research question, or what I would think of as the hypothesis that you want to test if you have an analytical study. So here, keep in mind there are some researchers which will have a hypothesis, but others will not have a hypothesis. And I know yesterday there was a module where you were talking about research questions. Then there's the issue we're talking about today, the research design. So depending on your research design, there are some methods which will work and others will not work. Then there is the issue of what information do you want. So based on the variables of your interest, the method you use will depend on the kind of information you want for those variables. So these are questions that we need our students to think about as they think about the method they'll engage to get their data. So the issue of the research question, the design, and the information they need. So we talked about this morning, isn't it? It's quantitative versus qualitative. Yeah? Yeah? So methods also can be categorized as quantitative and qualitative. So there are methods which are quant and the others which are qualitative. And we've all used these methods, so I'm sure we are familiar with this. So the common one methods are usually the surveys, then there are observations, then there is the issue of document review. So you might have some students who are doing systematic review or even meta-analysis. So it's important to also let them know of the existence of these methods that you can use for data collection. And I like this slide and this quote from Albert Einstein. but not everything that counts can be counted. That counts can be counted. So I know we had a big debate in the morning about quant and qual. So what can we see there? Is happy children. Another observation?
Smiling children.
They are smiling.
They are not necessarily happy.
They are all female. They are quiet. That is me. I'm a number person. Yes? Habit, yeah? Some means that they are somewhere in, yeah? They are teething, yeah? Anything else? Different complexion. Different complexion? So we can now look at that picture and come up with very different conclusions about it, isn't it? Me who is very quantitative and counting, there are 5 girls. But is it all that is in that picture? Yeah? Is it just 5 girls? There are so many other things about those 5 girls that people have talked about. They are happy. Yeah?
5 beautiful girls.
5 beautiful girls. Yeah? So as we engage our students, it's important for us to think about what is it that we really want from this research, yeah? And which method is going to help us bring out what we really want to study. So
if you can round, the fourth part of it is 5, isn't it? They are beautiful, different complexion, that policy.
exactly. So there now we are trying to go in depth about these 5 girls. They are also keeping, so it might tell you an idea about what age they are. Yeah? So we need to think about this very carefully when thinking about quantitative versus qualitative. So we all know that quantitative is data collection method that produces numbers, whereas qualitative produce words, but each has its own strengths and weaknesses. Sorry?
When we go back to the discussion we were having, in designing a study, like your picture there, I could collect the data as 5 grams, isn't it? I could collect qualitative data at the same time. I'm collecting quantitative data with all those characteristics that we mentioned. And so I'm combining the 2 aspects of quality and quantity.
And that's why he even mentioned that in the morning at time, most of the time what we're using is mixed method approach. But I think what I've always wondered and what I've seen also students doing is they do quant, they do qual, but there's nowhere in between that they try to marry the 2. So each is a standalone. And I don't know what people think about that when someone does quant, discuss the results of quant, discuss the results of qual, there's nowhere they try to. So I don't know what people think about that, whether that is mixed method. Because from my understanding of mixed method, there should be something that each is adding to the other one. I don't know whether I'm wrong or right. I might be wrong.
I think it is just a way of using both. There are different ways you can do a mixed method to understand it. You can do it like what I said in the morning. You can do it maybe like bunch is a major, and then you index a quantitative value, or the other way around, or you can do sequentially with the quantitative and the quants, or quantitative and the quants, and then you can do it in parallel. They are all.
But when you do it parallel, in your discussion, should they be communicating to some direction? That's my question, especially in the discussion section. Because I know when you do sequentially, there is what? Should the discussion still be parallel, or should they be getting to something?
I think so. If you are doing, for example, in parallel, so.
Yeah.
I think it depends on what your output is. If you're thinking of a peer-reviewed publication, then you think about discussion and what makes sense in discussion. If you're thinking of a policy brief or implication for an organization, you think about it perhaps differently. And the challenge for researchers is that journals encourage one type or another, and because of word count limitations, it's hard to report on a mixed methods research because so much space goes in the methodology description than in that of the results and discussion. And by default, even mixed methods research gets separated into a quantitative and qualitative aspect for publishing research, for publishing purposes. But I think if your research is really meant to implicate some kind of change in policy or practice, I think given that the output would be quite different, the positioning of the results would probably marry the two in terms of, this is what we're hearing from both sides, therefore the implication is so what.
Marry the two in some way.
I think it depends on the output, and I think journal publications make it hard to do that, even though that would be ideal. And I think we will found that amongst my colleagues and peers as well, is to report on qualitative as well as quantitative methodologies. I don't know what other people's experiences are.
What are your other people's experiences with done mixed method?
On what are your research questions and what you want to attain at the end? At which level are you mixing the two? At which level do you integrate the two things? That's very important from the beginning. What kind of information you need will then to lead you to what you get at the end. So it depends on what you need right from the beginning.
Yeah, so I think the take-home message is that we really need to think about our research process. So as I said, each has its own strengths and weaknesses. And the quant, majority of the time, is more structured and allows for aggregation as well as generalization. And I think we'll get into that when we start talking about even the issue we're talking about in the morning about representativeness. So for quant, if you do the correct sampling, then you might be able to generalize your findings. And whereas for qualitative, we are more interested in the depth or the richness. So if you're interested in in-depth information, you might want to go for qual rather than going for quantitative. And the other thing we need to let our students or engage our students in thinking about when choosing our method is that they need to think mainly about the purpose. Why are they doing the evaluation? And so they need to think about the method that will allow them to get information that can be analyzed and presented in a way that is credible and useful to themselves and others. So you need to think very carefully about the purpose of the study. Then the other one is to do with the respondents or the participants whom they plan to engage to be able to answer their research questions. Because there is the issue of literacy, there is the issue of culture. So how easy is it even to reach the participants? So the key to think about the respondents in advance before choosing a method. Then there's the issue of resources. How much time do you have? How much money? Then the kind of information you need. Are you interested in numbers? Or are you interested in the in-depth information? So these are things we need to engage our students to think about before they decide on a method to use for research. And apart from the method, there is the instrument to use. And basically the instrument is a device used to collect data. And the type of instrument depends on the method. So there are instruments for different kind of methods. So you might find a questionnaire being used for a survey. You might find an audio tape being used in a focus group discussion. So it goes hand in hand with the kind of method you choose. So different instruments will work best for different specific type of methods. And here are different types and different kind of methods, structured interview questionnaires. Then when doing systematic review, you are combining different methods. If you're doing secondary data analysis, majority of the time you're just the statistical software, you don't need anything else. If you're using existing data that is already electronic. If you're doing mapping, which might be process or service, you might be using like the GIS mapping, or you might be using sketch maps. When thinking about issues of mapping the study area you're interested in, you might have to sketch the map. And then for qualitative, for focus group, you need to have a guide And for observation, you might need to have things like a checklist. So this is just a guide on the various types of methods as well as the different tools that we can use. And I think it's very important for us to let our students know about the different things they need to consider when designing an instrument. The most important being what is the information they require to be able to answer their research question, as well as the data collection method, because you've seen the method will determine the kind of tool you use, as well as the people they are targeting. So what is their literacy level? And what is the number of people they plan to study? Because if you are going to do 3,000 questionnaires, I don't know how easy that is. How is it to do 3,000 questionnaires? It depends on the money, yeah? And the time you have. If you have all the money, I'm sure it's very easy to do. You can get so many data collectors and send them to the field. But even you as the investigator, how easy is it for you to track and see all that kind of activity? Yeah? Is it easy with 3,000 participants? So these are things to think about. How many people you plan to study? The scope of your study will determine the kind of instrument you're going to use. So I know here I'm only focusing on the questionnaire, but I know there are many other kind of instruments we use. Like, we also need to let our students know the things they need to think about when coming up with a focus group discussion guide. Yeah. So these are just mainly for a questionnaire when you're dealing with a survey, whereby we need to let them know that the questionnaire should be short and we should avoid leading questions and only use open-ended questions with a lot of caution. And again, we need to let them know that they need to think about how they intend to use the data that they collect when designing the questionnaire. So these are just bullets that will help us when delivering this to our students on things they need to think about when designing a questionnaire. And I think I wanted us to also maybe discuss on, if we are thinking of a focus group, we need to come up with a guide. Yeah? And there are things to consider when coming up with a guide. The participants, apart from the participants, the time.
How long do you want the discussion to last?
Location.
The location,
The type of questions you are going to ask.
the type of questions,
Yeah.
and what guides our questions? The objective of the focus group. Yeah? Other things? Yeah, which I always find, I don't know how easy that is. There is always someone dominating in an FGT, isn't it? Yeah? It's often the case that they are all equal.
You can never.
So how do you control it to ensure everybody's information is important or opinion?
I think it's the moderator is really well trained in the skills then to see how to make sure that this person doesn't kind of overshadow the rest of the participants. I think the other point I wanted to make for both the questionnaire, so all goes back to the literature of the group, what is embedded in the research framework. Basically, here the answer is the objective of the question.
I think that's a very important point, because at times students, I find them struggling with coming up with questions. And majority of the time is because of what she's saying, that they've not done their homework. Students most of the time don't want to do it totally. Yeah? But I think we need to really, and really engage them. And I think the conceptual framework part is also very, very important. It's important for them to conceptualize what they really want to do so that they can be able to know which variables do they want. So I think what should bring out, I think it's very important to let our students know that their research, their questions in the both the questionnaire as well as the FDP should be guided by conceptual framework of some sort based on what they want to study and also the literature. Any other additions on FGD?
You also pretest.
Yeah, qualitative. I'm very, very quantitative, so you will forgive me if I don't answer some questions to do with qualitative. So do you pretest the FGD guide? Yes.
Oh, yes.
In that case, are you testing the FGD or you are testing the Are we going to be testing the two user FGD now? Testing the FGD because we want also to see other issues on the FGD. What time does it take people to respond? Do they understand the question?
That's what
You pretest me.
It's one of
That's what
it's one of the activities for your focus group.
So if your key format is only one, whom do you pretest with?
That's not an activity.
So I'm saying if there are 3 or 4 of them, you know, if you're putting them together at the senior level or whatever, so they don't really have.
3 cannot qualify FGD.
In qualitative, in that pretest, it is part of data collection. We don't do away with that yet.
That's why I think you don't need
Yeah, so we
pretest.
will keep it. Yeah.
Sometimes we need it. I mean, the whole aim of testing is to go with it.
Right.
So, it's not, the focus is not, it's about how you can understand it. And yeah, that's why I think it's about testing the instrument, not the testing it. Depending on the app, depending on whether you are using ground theory or
But then this is a guide. Why do you want to pretest? It's a guide.
yeah, because the guide is 6 questions to interrogate, right?
Yes, you can always change the question anytime and nobody will question you as to why you changed the questions. You change the questions depending on the responses you get in the field.
Yeah, so that's what you're saying, maybe depending on the time and that flexibility is flexible. Depending on the time and resource you have, if you don't have much.
And as long as you use the pretest findings, they no longer become pretests. You may use, you may not use. And even after pretesting, if you go and start and find that you don't get the right issues, you change it. Will you call that a second pretest and ignore it?
But anyway, even for the questionnaire, it's important to pretest it anyway, because it gives you an idea about the validity or the reliability of the tool you're going to use.
You can still also use the information in the video analysis.
Group from the one you plan to study. But the issue was if you have, if the people you're targeting for the qualitative are very few, so whom do you do the pretest on?
If I'm doing my study, for example, the same characteristics. No. Really? I think according to the books, according to you just that when you need it your time.
The consensus of this.
The guide might be different, but the design and everything follows very similar to the one for focus discussion. Yeah.
In fact, in college, they don't call it pretest, they call it study.
I think people will discuss this or maybe over tea, the quality of to try and see if they can get to consensus that comes about during data collection. And there are several sources of bias, and it's important for us to let our students know and to think about these sources of bias. because this affects the validity of our data, which also goes hand in hand with the validity of our conclusions. Because at the end of the day, our data, with the fact that the instrument might be defective, so you might have questionnaires which might have open-ended questions without guidelines on how to ask or how to answer them. Then there are also, if you have a questionnaire with leading questions, or if you're dealing with an instrument and the instrument is not calibrated or not standardized, so you might see differences just because the instruments were different. Or maybe for the questionnaire, maybe the question was asked here differently compared to Kenya, and that's why we are seeing different results. Then there is the issue if you are doing an observation study, there is an observation bias, whereby the observer or the collector might only see the things they want to see. Yeah? So that's why there should be some checklists. Then there is the issue of the effect of the interviewer on the informant. So you might find the informant not trusting the intention of the interviewer. Yeah? So if you are not trusted by the person you're asking questions, they might give you different answers. So you should win their trust. And that's why I think it's very, very important how we do our community entry and how we engage our participants at the beginning. Then there is the issue of information bias. So recall, how far do we expect our participants to remember? Then if we are dealing with existing records, there might be missing data. And how do you handle missing data? Do we just throw it away? Or should we include it in our analysis, or what do we do? Because these are biases that might invalidate our results and has an impact on our conclusion. So it's important for us to let our students know about this when thinking about data collection and try and see how they can sort out this at the beginning, not when they are done with the study. And I think the other very important thing is that we need to let our students know that they need to have a data collection plan. Very, very important. So, and the plan should include things like how they plan to carry out the various, they need to list the tasks and how and who will do it. Then they also need to think about the timelines and prioritizing the various tasks. Then they should have an actual schedule of the different activities. So not only just listing, but having an actual schedule of all the activities for data collection. So this is very, very important for our students to know. Then I know we've talked about this, the whole idea of pilot or pre-testing our tools. And this is very, very important even in development of the proposal, because this the pre-test can make you change a lot of things before you actually go and do the actual data collection. And for proposal development, it's important because one can even revise the tools, yeah, before going for ethical approval. So any additions or comments on data collection? Things that might have left out that are important that we should ensure our students are aware of?
Triangulation. There's a question about whether the FGD guide and the key performance guide are the same. Sometimes we find that you miss out on the opportunity of finding out more about something. You might go for a focus group discussion and then people bring out certain things which they are not able to explain fully. And later you're going to talk to maybe a key informant from the same place. It gives you an opportunity to be able to make this say, when I went to this place, people were saying this and this is not clear. So just that point of saying, whenever we look at our tools, at times you design it once and you forget about it. You don't really take time to go back and say, what else should I add? what are the gaps. And yet this gives us an opportunity to triangulate our data. The other is related to when we are making our data collection plans. Sometimes we plan to go and do all our focus groups in 2 days, you're done. And you're out and you come back. Then you begin to read, then you realize, okay, they didn't probe this question enough. You realize, okay, this is coming up and we don't know why. And when we are learning, we are always told qualitative, you should analyze and keep going back to the field. But when it comes to the actual implementation, sometimes we just want to go, do a quick job and come out. Or at the end of the day, you not listen to what was done that day and picked out the issues you need to address. So also saying our data collection plans, we should try to make them more flexible, or we should try to plan for at least that second visit that we shall do after we have done some analysis so that we can be able to make up something.
Yeah, I think that the other important thing, making good questionnaire or any other tool is one thing. But second, supervision of that, ensuring implementation of that is another very important thing. For instance, adding on what you are saying on the interviewers not trusting what the questionnaire is seeking for. You may find that you take people in the field, if you don't supervise them well, they may feel it the way they want. Or I have one instance where we have a very long questionnaire and we are marking these disease profiles. So if you find maybe a person has not fallen sick maybe for the past 6 weeks, you jump maybe 100 questions. And then when we are doing quality control in the evening, you find that some of the interviewers, they have the same pattern. They don't have any person who is sick. Now, if you decide to go again to those households, you find a completely different information to what they have. So having questionnaire is one thing, but implementation is also crucial to get right information.
Yeah, I know even in the DHS, I think they've also had that several questions for household with under 5. So majority of the time would say they don't have, even the women, they know that if you have under 5, you'll be asked this many other questions. So they say they don't have, so that they are not asked these other many questions. But I think you're bringing out an.
We're just talking about, we are doing an endline survey and we did a baseline. So you begin to ask, so what did we do? Then you find there is no documentation of exactly what was done here and what was done there. Discussion was done before going to the field, but while in the field, exactly what was done was not exactly, recorded. We went to these 10 villages and this location and this. So just to stress also the importance of us keeping all the documentation of whatever we do, because later you never know what you might be interested in referring back to or looking for. Your side.
So the other issue as we talk about data collection is thinking about the participants, which is key. And so I'll briefly talk about the whole issue of sampling and sample size determination, but I promise there are no formulas, so don't. So our key research questions are to do with the population. So we have our target population. However, we don't get to the target population because there are some eligibility criteria which we have, which we define ourselves. It's based on the research question. If I'm interested in unmet needs or family planning, I can only get that on a specific group of people. So there are people who would meet that criteria for focusing on what is the unmet need of family planning in Kenya, for example. So I'll come up with my eligibility criteria. So this might be women who are married, who have a specific age group, who are not pregnant, so that would be my criteria for eligibility. So I get to my study population based on who is eligible. Then from that, ideally I would want to get information from the population, but there are some key limitations to that. I don't have the money, I don't have the time, so what I do is I get a sample from that study population. And there's the whole idea of how do I get the sample from that population. And keeping in mind that the conclusions I might want are to do with the population of interest. So I want to get a sample that will ensure I can generalize my results. And so the eligibility criteria consists of both the inclusion and the exclusion. And I think this is another place we need to highlight mainly to our students, because what they do is they write the inclusion and the exclusion is the opposite. Yeah? So I see that a lot of time. I don't know whether you also see students doing that, whereby they tell you the inclusion is over 18, the exclusion is those who are under 18. Yeah? I don't know whether that's an exclusion criteria. But I've already included that they're over 18, so in the one people have included, is there anyone who is below 18? No. So the exclusion should be those people where now I want to fine-tune those who meet my inclusion criteria. So I think it's important to let our students know what is an inclusion and what is an exclusion criteria. So sampling basically is whereby we are trying to get a subset of the entire population. And for quantitative, I'm mainly interested in drawing inference about the population using the data from my sample. And so the way I get to be able to do that, I want to ensure that my sample is representative of my population to some level. And so representative ensures that I can draw valid conclusions for the whole population from my sample. And a representative sample is one whereby the characteristics of the sample are almost similar to the one in the population where you got your sample from. And this is very, very important for generalizability. So if my sample is not representative of the population, then I might not be able to generalize my findings to the whole population. And a lot of times our research question is to do with the population, not with the sample. So we don't really want to study the population, but we are limited by funding or by time also. And the other thing is that we also want to ensure we get accurate or precise estimates. We start talking about if I'm studying a very large group, I'm likely to get inaccurate information because of even the issue of supervision. Some enumerators, you send them to the field, they sit at a tree and make up data. Yeah? Which is a key problem we have as researchers. So there are several sampling techniques, and there are those which are what you call probabilistic, and there is non-probabilistic. And the probabilistic one is whereby we can bring in some probability of you being part of the sample. So there is systematic, cluster, stratified, simple. I'm sure we've come across all these sampling techniques, and also the non-probabilistic. And for quantitative, we mainly use which one? For quant, probabilistic. And for qualitative, a lot of times we are doing non-probabilistic. And so that comes out to the whole issue of generalizability. So can we generalize findings from a study where we use non-probabilistic?
So,
yes.
Do you have
yes, but there is the issue of now, can you generalize those findings to the population? Can you start bringing in p-values? Can you start doing inference? I agree, there are times whereby I really want to do probabilistic, but I can't. So I have to go non-probabilistic. But now the question comes about generalizability. Can I generalize those findings?
The students, maybe probably we don't know the school calendars. So you just take the convenient student that will be around.
But now the question is, are those students representative of that school, the ones you got? Then it means the results you got are just for that sample.
Whether you intended to use that research findings for generalization.
Yeah, whom did you want to study? It goes back to who is your study population. Whom did you plan to study? So if you plan to study the whole school, then so that sample should be representative of the population.
We want to come in this hall we are in, and I just start there, appreciate. Then I make the sample. Yes, I can generalize. Because the sample size I took is actually big. So if for that case of going to the school, if I meet the first students I meet, if there are many that can represent the bigger number of the school students, then I can generate.
But now the question is, how many is meant to be represented?
Then that's why always you need to know the total population for you at least to say, and to say that this number can represent.
What if your sample, as she's saying, you are planning to study a school with us from 1 up to 8?
If you know that these are the students they are in this class, then those that I will first meet in that same class, I will interview those.
But is that convenient? Prof wants to say something.
No, I think there are things that are principles. They are agreed principles. Those I don't think they need to be debated.
Just to ask.
Say they're only going to pick the ones who come on Mondays?
No, I say I'm sorry, election June 10th. So I'll pick every patient who comes out of the clinic on Monday for Monday morning and pick the patients.
Yeah, that's convenience.
That's convenience.
Yes.
Just what to say that in that case, I'm giving an example of a common thing that people do. The person who's now going to collect data, what would be the way that they should go about it in order for it to be?
I think it's actually a very common practice. Almost all students you have seen also, they write convenience sampling.
Yeah.
And they still want to generalize their findings. Now, I don't think you can generalize from a convenience sample.
For convenience, you cannot generalize.
You cannot generalize your findings.
That's the matter.
Yeah.
That's a principle, and you cannot break that.
On this issue, clinical studies, convenience sampling is commonly used. And it said that as representative of the simple understanding, because patients who come consecutively to health facility, selection can happen before the study or after starting the study. So those who come to a facility, they're kind of randomly selected parts of the population. There is no systematic kind of bias. So, I think there is some systematic difference between those who are conveniently selected and